Evening, everybody. We're opening up the continuation of the public hearing for Bladen's Ridge site plan application. And first order of business is seating of the alternates. Mr. Sloat was seated last month, so do I have a motion to seat Mr. Sloat as an alternate, as a
Make
full
a
member?
motion to seat Mr. Sloat.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that carries unanimously.
No secretary tonight?
No, I don't think we. Yeah, do we need to?
No.
Right, but do we need a, shall we, no, we don't need, I don't think we need to install a secretary.
No, there's nothing.
All right, is the applicant, when we were here last time, we left off with some public comment, and I think the applicant was going to respond perhaps to some of the public comment from last month. I thought that might be a good way to proceed, if that's good with the applicant.
Yes, Lisa is out until we can get her.
Okay, sure, no rush. Thank you.
Are you gonna be okay with Walter not?
Pardon?
I say, is everything gonna be okay with you, Walter's not?
That's
here?
okay. Yeah, we don't need to.
We have a
install.
quorum. No, we have a
Yeah,
quorum.
we have a quorum. We have 5 members, so.
Yeah.
Oh.
I'm still in shock from last month.
You haven't been here long enough. This is town. Brian. Brian, are those the site plans underneath there?
I don't know if I'm related.
Are you,
We have related.
that's related? Yeah, please. Thank you. No, I don't want to mess everything up.
Yeah, I mean, that's dated.
Okay, I'll mess everything up.
LLC?
Are these all, these are for the commission? But the one last month, okay. Nothing changes on the plan.
Okay, as I mentioned, last month we left off with some public comment, and I would assume that council, you'd like to come up and maybe address some of those comments. Then I know there's been discussions with staff. I'd like to get together between staff and applicant as to where we stand on that. So if you'd like to continue.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Lisa Feinberg. I'm an attorney with Carmi, Torrance, Sandak, and Hennessy. I excuse my tardiness this evening. With me tonight, I have Maureen Cox and Jay Klein from my office, Janet Rozuski from Gooding Architecture, John Paul Garcia from John Paul Garcia and Associates, Stephen Ullman from Alfred Benich and Company, Joseph Versteeg from Versteeg Associates LLC, Matthew Pop from Environmental Land Solutions, and on behalf of the applicant SHC Seymour Springs LLC, Jerry Kiley. So as you know, this is a continuation from the hearing of December 12th. Hope everyone had a happy new year and a lovely holiday season. In preparation for tonight, we did go back and look at our notes and as well as the video to make sure that we could address all of the issues that remain outstanding. And based on my notes, there were kind of 3 core issues presented that evening. One was whether or not there's sufficient water pressure to the site. The other related to traffic volumes, and the third relates to water quality. So in terms of water pressure, I can tell you that we've had multiple preliminary conversations with the water company regarding the development plan, and no concern has been raised in those conversations. Ultimately, the water company will need to issue a will serve letter for the development. That's just a normal course of action in order for us to connect to the water supply. And we'll also have to provide an easement for the water company for the infrastructure that we need to put in place. It would be very unusual to receive that letter at this point, just in terms of what's required to be submitted for that letter to be issued. If for some reason we find that there is not sufficient water pressure as we move through the process, there is a solution to that problem. You just have to put in some sort of fire pump. So it's not like there's not a solution, it just happens to be a more expensive solution. But as I noted, we've been given no reason to believe that that's going to be an issue. So that's the water supply. In terms of traffic volumes, undoubtedly this development is going to result in additional vehicle trips as compared to the site today. We all know the site today is vacant, so any sort of development on the site is going to result in more vehicle trips. However, if you were to compare the number of trips based on what's permitted on the site, we've talked about the fact that the site is in the MF zone, and based on the size of the site, we could develop the property with up to 63 units. So if you compare a 63 unit project to a 90 unit project, you'll find that the additional number of vehicle trips really is very, very modest. And you should have received a letter to that effect from Mr. Ullman. I hope that that was in your package. If it's not, we have copies. Did you all receive that letter?
No.
No.
The jail passed that out. You'll see once you receive it that there's a difference of 12 additional trips in the morning peak hour and 15 additional trips in the evening peak hour, and that importantly that the level of service was not impacted at all when you conduct this analysis. So whether there's 63 units or 90 units, there's no reason to believe that the development will impede traffic operations or result in any sort of health or safety concern, which is really that threshold question for an affordable housing application. So that's the traffic. We also submitted a memorandum addressing Mr. Nesteriak's comments from, I believe, the last Inland Wetlands Commission meeting, primarily related to water quality. But a lot of those comments have also come up in front of this commission, and so I'm not sure. Did you receive that memo? We had that too. So while stormwater seems to fall primarily within the IWC's purview, we did want to take some time to walk you through this analysis, which really just takes you through what we're doing in terms of how the system is designed, what we're doing in terms of stormwater quality measures, what additional measures we're willing to incorporate, and for the measures that we're not willing to incorporate, which primarily relates to above ground infiltration, why we don't think that that's prudent for the site. So if it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, especially since you're receiving it tonight, I'd like for Mr. Garcia to walk you through that analysis, if that's okay.
Yeah, just one overview question.
Sure.
I assume we've narrowed this gap significantly to next to nothing with respect to the staff's.
I'm hoping. That's my goal. But they'll have to respond to that.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
Brian, did you get this?
For the record, my name is
Bethany, and you're losing it at 20. I'll try to be brief, and I'm gonna walk you through the treatment train only because we feel it's relatively important. We have approximately 4 acres on a 10 acre. This site is approximately 10 acres, sloped from south to north. And it's approximately 10 acres of wood. We're going to convert that into approximately 4 acres of impervious and 6 acres of will remain grass or woods. The treatment train, because you have a regulation, and not only that, but you have an obligation that your post-development flows, after the development is done, you should have water leaving the site at a rate that is what they call pre-development. In other words, as it exists now, you have a volume of water that's leaving the site during a specific rain event. At the end of the construction cycle, the amount of water leaving the site has to be at that same rate. So the pre-development flow has to equal the post-development flow or less. Now, what we propose, when we look at this thing, this one would be a little better. That's called a treatment train. You have your impervious soil, your impervious areas, you take that, you route it through various structures, you clean it up, you remove the pollutants. The state of Connecticut wants at least 80% solids removal, pollutants removal, and then you discharge it. In this case, our discharge points are down here on Spring Street in the existing catch basin. Here, we're taking this half of the site, comes down, it's filtered through a series of structures, and comes down the street. We're putting in a new line and discharges to an existing catch basin. This half of the site comes across, comes down, goes through some treatment facilities, and discharges to an existing catch basin here on Spring Street. Those are the choke points, what we would call choke points. And those are, you would take a look at the pre-development area, you would take the flow going into those basins, and then you work backwards, and you would detain, treat, store, and infiltrate the rest of the water that exceeds the flow that's leaving the site now. And that's part of the record that's been submitted. And I think Brian had said previously he had no issues with the numbers. He had other issues, but I think the volumes, he was okay with the volumes. And I'm not trying to, and if I'm wrong, please believe me. If I'm wrong, please say something. But I think that was said last time. The disagreement is actually in the treatment chain. The treatment chain is how we take that water and we try to achieve the goals that the state has set, which is the removal of solids and nitrogen, phosphorus, and everything else. In this particular site, it's a little interesting. This is not a Walmart parking lot. And so the sediment load on this site is a little bit different than if you were doing this as a parking lot. Approximately a third of the impervious surface is buildings. And by definition, and by definition I mean according to the state manual, rainwater is considered clean for treatment purposes. In other words, it doesn't carry sediment. So a third of the discharge that we're dealing with is relatively clean water. It does not carry sediments or pollutants. And that's by definition, it's part of the package that was submitted to you guys. She actually submitted, I think it was section 6, which deals with treatment and treatment systems from the state of Connecticut stormwater manual. And that should be part of your package. And so a third of the water that we have to treat is clean to start with. So we're only worried about sediment removal from 2/3 of the water. We're still worried about infiltration. We're still worried about some other things. So what we do is we start by discharging the water, the road water and the roof leaders, into a catch basin, which goes into an underground detention system here. From there, it goes, additional roads picked up to a second system here, and then additional roads connected to a third system here. These 3 underground detention systems will store any excess in excess of the pre-development flow. In front of each one of those, we originally had a conventional sediment grit chain, which is considered a secondary treatment facility. I disagree with it, but considering the amount of sediments we had, I thought that was sufficient. Brian had a problem with that, and at the last wetlands meeting, he mentioned he would be happier if we changed that out to a vortechnics unit. So what we did was, and that should be also in your package, we're going to swap those out. It says on the drawing, particle separator, we're actually putting in a hydrodynamic separator or techniques type unit. So that will be a change to the drawings. What the swirl technology does is a little bit different than what a oil water separator does. However, there's about 15 or 20 years of data on it that proves that it is no longer considered a secondary treatment but a primary treatment. And in fact, if you go into as an example, a Walmart parking lot, you have a tremendous sediment load, you have a tremendous oils load, you have a tremendous floatables load. You have very little nitrogen, phosphorus, you have very little fertilizer load because it's a Walmart parking lot. These things are how they now treat a lot of them. Rather than going to an open basin, because land being as expensive as it is, they go to a vortechnics unit, they run it through a hydrodynamic separator, and some of these can be quite large, and they put it into an underground system. And there are numerous papers and there are numerous studies that have been done to show that that works as their primary system. So we swapped out the grid separators, and we're now putting in hydrodynamic separators. And so that's the basic treatment chain. You go from a heat sump catch basin, which is the primary preliminary sediment removal, removes about 40 or 50%.
You say deep sump, is that 2 foot or 4 foot?
No, a 2-foot sump is a conventional.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
A deep sump would be 4 feet.
Okay.
We're going from a deep sump catch basin to a vortechnics, to a hydrodynamic separator, into the underground infiltration detention system, and then it discharges down into the brook. And it's our contention that the water leaving the site is substantially in accordance with the state of Connecticut recommendation for 80% removal. One of the other comments that came out during the discussion was the use of Brian, or town engineer would like to see LID, which is low impact development methods, rain gardens or something. Well, when we start this process, we look at things like that. And rain gardens, and I just so happens I brought a couple of examples of what a rain garden looks like. Rain gardens are shallow, 6 inches to a foot deep depressions planted with vegetation. You can make them 1.5 feet deep. They normally don't have metered inlets or outlets. In other words, you would take, like in something like this, if this was next to a building, you would just run the pipe in, it would discharge in here, and it would filter out. It's designed to allow infiltration as a treatment facility. Well, if you needed rain gardens for a site like this, you would need probably about 12 to 15,000 square feet of rain garden, which is not practical. The second thing is rain gardens don't function very well on steep slopes. They require relatively shallow depressions spread out on level areas because they promote infiltration. As a treatment, it's considered a primary treatment. The third reason, and you know, there is a God and she has a sense of humor. The third reason why I personally detest rain gardens is that they don't work when they're covered with ice and snow. And about 2.5 weeks ago, we had a great example of that. Everything got covered with ice and snow. Well, if you have a functioning system that's supposed to infiltrate your runoff, and this is all covered with ice and snow, your roof leader still leads into it. It's still dumping water into it, but it's got nowhere to go. So what happens is instead of infiltrating, it overflows. And on a steep site like this, it's going to keep overflowing and overflowing and overflowing and end up down in the street. So rain gardens And we looked at those. Rain gardens are not practical for this type of development. But more importantly, they're not practical for a lot of things because they don't function 20 to 30% of the time. They don't function with ice and snow on them, no matter what anybody tells you. And I think that ice storm we had a couple of weeks ago was a perfect example. Everything was coated. You know, when the grass is coated, everything's coated, nothing's going to permeate. So that's why this system, which is underground, allows water to work into the system 24/7, 365. It always works. They're simple to keep clean because the vortechnics unit will take most of the sediments that don't get picked up by the catch basin. The catch basin takes about 40% out. Vortechnics units take about 90 to 95% out. So starting with a third clean water, there is very little sediment that gets into these things, no matter what anybody tells you. This is not a high sediment area. State of Connecticut usually uses as a starting point 250 to 450 pounds of sand and salt per lane mile, which everybody says is kind of, geez, that doesn't sound like a lot, but it's quite a bit of sand. This is a housing development. Maybe they'll use 3 times as much. That could be a pickup truck load. That's only 27 cubic feet. A deep sump catch basin has a capacity of around 30 to 32 cubic feet, just in the sump itself. The Vortechnics unit have an excess of 200 to 500 cubic feet, depending on how they're sized, and you would have different size. And on top of it, we have 3. We have 1 in front of each chamber. So we have 3 of these, not just 1. And they're sized to pick up the appropriate rain event, be it 2, 5, 10, 25, 50, and 100. 90% of your rain events are what they call 1-inch water quality volume. 90% of your storms are 1 inch or less over a 24-hour period. So we're not talking a lot. And given these size of these basins, 1 inch of rain in this basin is about 1 inch of depth, and there's 6 inches of stone under each one of these things. So in most cases, you're probably going to get no water leaving the site because of infiltration capacities in the basins themselves. Now, as I said, Brian had a couple of comments. One comment was get rid of the grid separators, go to a hydrodynamic check, which we did. He asked about doing rain gardens, which we're not going to do. I don't believe they function correctly. I don't believe they will solve the problem. I want a functioning system that works 24/7, 365. These don't work when there's ice and snow on them.
I put in many of those systems, and they do have overflow systems with it, with a small pipe on it.
Correct.
And as far as the ice and snow thing not penetrating them, the best way to evaporate water is up. And a very large system, I'm going to go look at it tomorrow, because I do have to fix something in it. But they do work very well, in my opinion.
Like I said, I've seen some that work. I've seen a lot that don't.
If they're designed properly, they work.
I've seen, and I'm not going to argue the point, but I'm telling you right now that they're not designed for a steep site, and if you go to the NEMO site, which is the state of Connecticut stormwater site, they actually say right in it, you shouldn't use them on steep sites.
I have a 12-foot slope.
Okay, you have a little bit more here. You can design almost anything anywhere, but they also take up a tremendous amount of land surface area. 3 to 4 times what you would use for underground
That's
detention.
understandable.
So, like I said, plus, you have to look at what you're doing here. A third of the water you're treating is clean. The other 2/3 has sediments and maybe some fertilizer in it. It's not the same thing as a 40-unit housing development where you have 40 one-acre lots where you're going to get a lot of fertilizer. And sediment, again, is a lower end of it, whereas fertilizer and pollutants is a higher end. So you worry more about that. And there we usually do rain gardens on an individual lot-by-lot basis. So you might, on a 40-lot development, you might do 40 rain gardens.
You have the room to do it. I understand.
You have the room to do it. But more importantly, it's a different treatment chain. Here, you have a relatively steep slope. You have relatively clean water entering the system. You're not looking to get a lot of pollutant removal. You're looking to get some sediment removal. That's what we're worried about, and we're not even worried about a lot of sediment removal. And then the last thing is, what we did was, in recognition of another comment that Brian made, we took, and Lisa will give you that in a minute, we took the last basin, the last treatment basin before it discharges to the street, and turned it into a true infiltration basin. There's infiltration occurring in both of these underground detention systems. No ifs, ands, and buts about it. But we did design the bottom basin, we took out, and we turned that into an infiltration basin, which is a primary treatment system. So now all the water leaving the site passes through at least 2 primary treatment systems. And I think that's basically it. And Lisa's got the plans.
What did you do for the stockpile, the snow stockpile area? Do you have any, it just?
All we're gonna do is put in we talked about that. We're gonna put in
Because you're gonna have a lot more sediments in the stockpile, the snow stockpile area, because you're gonna be scraping up all the sand and the snow.
we have a swale, so that, if you remember, we originally had them up here and there, and now we have one on top of this one.
Does the swell dump into a catch basin?
Yeah, the swale dumps into the catch basins of the treatment system,
On which side of the road?
over here.
So,
It's gonna go under the road. That's a
it's gonna
condition
go
of
under,
approval.
this pipe gonna go under.
Yeah,
Oh,
you're
gotcha,
gonna
okay,
have
okay, gotcha.
to put
Okay, I couldn't,
a yard drain into the catch basin.
gotcha. It would look like a garden.
Probably a little bit bigger.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
want
well,
something
that's
they
the
can
same
run
idea
over.
as a garden.
The plastic ones, I like concrete and cast iron.
Okay.
The plastic ones don't survive. So what we would do is put in a swale here, which is also, by the way, a primary treatment system. And
Right,
tie it
that's what
into
I'm
that
asking,
catch
because
basin.
which stockpile area is gonna have more sand?
This one is on top of this basin, so this one goes right into the treatment end.
Right, right.
This is right on top of the treatment chain.
Okay.
This is what we're gonna use for one of the snow cells. And then this one here, we're just gonna put this one here. And it was brought up that some of the neighbors were worried about snow melting and going onto the property. So what we're gonna do is put a cutoff swale here and tie into this catch
Okay,
basin.
that's fine.
And again, the amount of, there you're looking for floatables more than sediments, because when they plow, they pick up any of that crap, and that stuff.
Yeah, no, I understand.
And-
You're gonna have
and they're
everything,
hoods.
that's what I'm trying to say, everything is.
Everything is treated.
Yeah.
Nothing leaves the site untreated.
Yeah, that's gonna be the site when it snows out, where you're gonna have the most sediment and the
Yeah.
most garbage,
Yes,
and everything is gonna be.
that's correct. And like I said, this one's on top of one of the detention systems. So this one is already taken care of, and this one we're just gonna put a swale in here so that we don't
Gotcha. Yeah.
do this.
I was just worried how you were gonna get into the
Yeah.
catch basin, that's all.
So I think that's basically it. I think I covered everything.
So John Paul spoke about the alternate plan for converting the detention base, 2 of the detention basins into above ground, or I guess they're in the ground, infiltration basins. And I've spent a lot of time reading the 2004 Stormwater Management Manual, so I now understand that that is a confirmed primary treatment practice, which is one of the comments that we had received from Mr. Nesteriak. I will tell you that I'm calling it an alternate plan for a reason. It has been our position that converting those into an infiltration basin, while feasible, it's not necessarily prudent, and that's part of the memo that you received. That's a conversation that we've had, and it's a continuing conversation that we're having with the Inland Wetlands Commission. I don't think that it's necessarily something that you all have to take up, but we did want the plan in the record for you in case the Inland Wetlands Commission decides that that's the path that they want to take. So at this point, it's an alternate plan. It's not the plan until if and when the Inland Wetlands Commission decides that that's something that they want to do. If that, just want to be clear about that. And Jay, did you we have those plans, so let's hand those out for the record.
Thank you, Jim.
Does the commission have any additional questions for Mr. Garcia?
Is there anything more on water quality, or is that the whole?
I think that we've covered it, unless,
No, it was just a brief
Okay.
overview of what we did, why we did it, and our opinion that what we've done exceeds the requirements of what we're supposed to do.
Okay.
We actually have less water leaving the site. Post-development is actually a lower flow than pre-development, and the treatment chain takes care of what we need to take care of.
Do you have any other detail on the play area that you guys said you were gonna put in?
it hasn't been designed, if that's your
Okay, yeah,
question.
okay,
It,
okay.
yeah, it just, all we have is,
If a designated area for it, though, I see.
yeah, but if the commission would like to see something, we certainly can take a condition of approval that requires it to be shown to you, or,
Yeah, it'd be
or
fine.
something along those lines. But I anticipate it'll be swings and slide and
Yeah, I saw where you're gonna put it, that's fine.
that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other commissioners have any other questions about this? In that case, would it be, Brian, would you be able to, is this a good time to address your thoughts on everything we just heard? Absolutely, as long as we can hear you. Should we bring the mic over?
So, my comments have been documented in the letters. I've asked for a vegetative element from the beginning, as Mr. Garcia said. I think what they've offered in this latest round is a step in the right direction. I don't know if we're ever going to come to a consensus on what the right way to do this is. I've heard numerous times that there's just not enough room for vegetation, not enough room for bioinfiltration, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. And I think my problem with that is that I don't think this was ever designed with that kind of element from the start considered. So it is what it is. My opinion is that developments of this size should be considered with water quality and stormwater quality as part of it in low impact design methods, which are some of the things that Mr. Garcia was talking about, infiltration, bioinfiltration, water quality, so on and so forth. I think it's a good step that they're going to a technical unit as opposed to the grit sediment chambers. But I think there's more information that needs to be supplied, not only with this, but with the other things that they're projecting, such as sizing information. I just saw this infiltration basin plan, so I don't have too many comments on that yet, at least. But we need more details of these kind of elements. Again, I don't think there's going to be a full consensus here, but I mean, I applaud the fact that they're offering to at least upgrade the equipment.
In your mind, what would the consequence be of doing it as they've proposed versus doing it the way you want to do it? And specifically as it relates to health and safety.
These systems, these underground systems, are not necessarily a bad thing in any way. I've designed hundreds of them. They need to be maintained, they need to be inspected, as the deep pumps, the catch basins, and the pipes, and gutters, and everything else needs to be maintained. So that is something that's going to need to be followed and inspected and properly executed
Well, it has-
in order to maintain these systems and keep them operating for decades to come, which is what they're going to do.
Let me ask you a question about that. That, of course, is the responsibility of the developer.
Sure.
And do we monitor that? Does the town monitor the maintenance?
I typically no. There's certainly, it's not uncommon to have a conditional approval that annual reports be submitted to the town. I don't know if we do that at any other project. I know back in the day when I was involved with Stop and Shop, there was conditional approval that we had to submit that, or the owner would have to submit the cleaning out of her technical. And I doubt the town has ever received that. But, it's certainly, I'm sure that, I think they've already offered to do that.
To do that?
And that would be a very prudent thing to one thing I also want to mention, just with the infiltration, in relation, in response to the comments tonight in the memo, and they have designed these systems to be infiltration systems, although the calculations that go with it have ignored that, which I think is a very good idea. One problem I have is that two of the systems, system 1 and system 3, are extremely deep, 20 to 30 feet or more. And it's been Mr. Garcia's statement that it's all sand and gravel. The problem I have is that the pictures that come through do not look like sand and gravel to me when you're down that deep. And I would have been happy to go out and inspect when I did it. I never got notice until the morning of, and it was involved. So that doesn't really, I'm not saying that they need to change anything about this, although I am concerned about relying on infiltration on the depths so deep. The areas that they're talking about changing this over to infiltration basins that they're offering in an alternative plan, they're not as deep, so I'm not quite as concerned with them. But I may want to have a longer discussion with Mr. Garcia if they're open to it on just talking about the soil conditions on the really deep systems. Because what I've seen in a couple of areas is when you do an excavation that deep into material, typically it's ledge, and you create a system in an area that doesn't infiltrate, the surrounding water will gravitate toward it. So I'm a little concerned at these depths, are we going to start dewatering the groundwater table? No. It's not something, it's something that we can work out, but I am just pointing out that just because they're saying these are infiltration basins, I'm a little concerned about how realistic it is at the depths that they're infiltrating.
Because it's below the water table?
I don't have good confidence that these are sand and gravel soils at the depth that these two are systems.
Can't that be determined easily? What am I missing?
He did test it, and it's his opinion that they are, although I'm just going off of the picture. Go ahead.
Go ahead, what were you going to say?
There's test pit information. You're talking about this basin here,
That one and the one in the
and this one over here.
in the courtyard, yeah.
Okay. This is a large cut. In other words, the site itself is going to get taken down. The systems themselves are only about 6 to 8 feet deep total from proposed finished grade, but they are 20 feet down. They are a large cut, as Brian said.
From today.
From today, yeah, from the existing grade. They are fairly large cuts. The material on these two systems is a moderately compact material. When I was talking, and we have test pits in each one of these systems, the gravel was almost confined to this area here, whereas this area up here was a moderately compact material. And we designed the systems, as Brian says, we designed the systems on the basis of no infiltration at all. So they're actually over-designed by quite a bit of factor. In other words, it's a conservative design. If all the gravel, if all the sand, if all the stone underneath the system clogs up and you're not getting any infiltration, you still have a post-development flow that's less than a pre-development flow. The infiltration occurs because A, you've got a 6-inch bed, and in these areas, even in moderately compact to compact soils, a 1-inch perk rate, which is actually a misnomer, but a very slow infiltration rate, you're still going to get infiltration to a degree, even though for these systems, for these four, we didn't depend upon it as a primary storage system. We did not include it as part of the drainage calculation. If we did, these systems would be substantially less. And I apologize. I didn't even think, and this happened so fast because of the last meeting, and that's I should have known better. I should have at least given you a courtesy call. For that, I apologize when we did the test pits. The infiltration basins where they are is pretty sandy and gravel material. So I have no professional disagreement with him on some, but yes, we can talk a little bit more about it. And I'll be more than happy to sit down with Brian and walk him through everything. And just understand that we did not depend totally on infiltration for stormwater management or quality. It's a belt, what we took was a belt and suspenders approach. We take a look at what we have, we take a look at what our issues are. This isn't a golf course. If this was a golf course, we'd be treating this entirely different. A golf course, you have almost no sediment load. You have a monstrous nutrient load. So your infiltration systems are monster rain gardens, monster infiltration trenches, because you have to reduce the pollutants which are generated by a golf course. This is not a Walmart parking lot where you have just the opposite. You have almost no pollutant load from phosphorus, from nitrates and everything, but you have a monstrous sediment load from sanding. You have a monstrous debris load from rubber stuff that people throw in the parking lot, and you have oils. This is a lot less than that. This is about a third clean water and about 2/3 water that needs to be treated. So you're putting in a treatment chain that's designed for 100% solids, and you're not putting 100% solids in. You're putting water that's only got 60% solids. So that's why I said we look at these very carefully. And that's why Brian, he's 100% correct. We will probably never come to 100%, but we can meet somewhere in the middle. And that's what we tried to do by offering the infiltration fund, by changing to the vortechnics unit. And there is a did you submit a technical paper on the vortechnics unit? Just for, I only have one copy. Here's the technical paper on the vortechnics unit.
I'm thinking Brian should probably get that.
Well,
I don't know.
Yeah, you've seen these enough times, right?
I could do me.
I don't
I
know.
know what it worked out.
Okay. That was for the record.
Last call.
That's the technical paper on the vortechnics unit. When the stormwater manual was first instituted back in 2004, a lot of this stuff was considered secondary treatment because there was no long-term history and there were no long-term studies done on the effectiveness of any of these treatment chains. Fast forward 16, 18, 20 years later, especially firms like Vortechnics, there's a whole bunch of firms that make these, what they call swirl chambers, hydrodynamic separators, that have conducted studies to determine how much pollutants they actually remove. And they're very good at it. And they're extremely good at it. The same thing with this type of a system. If you look at the 2004 manual, this was emerging technology in 2004. You fast forward, and I think 90% of the shopping centers that are installed in this country have this type of a unit under the parking lot to store stormwater. And they usually put a vortechnics unit or a swirl hydrodynamic separator in front of it to get the sediments out. So the technology, fast forward in 18, 20 years, is becoming more and more proven. I understand the purpose for LID. I understand the purpose for rain garden. I understand all that stuff. But it requires maintenance, more maintenance than something like this. And I'm sorry, I'll disagree with this because I've seen it and I've designed around it. And just for grins, I did an application last month in the town of Woodbridge where the chairman actually asked, and it's on the record, watch the record. He actually asked us to go from a rain garden to an underground system for a house development because it was his opinion that they don't work when they do this.
This is Seymour.
I know that. But what I'm saying is everybody, you get 65 people in the room, you get 65 stormwater guys in the room, and you're going to get 68 opinions.
Yeah, hey, listen. And the only thing, I agree with what Brian's saying. That's such a deep cut. Okay, once you get into lead, you're getting down that deep.
Well,
When you find lead, you're finding groundwater.
But we
And
haven't
I
found
understand
that.
it's
We went down
concern-
38 feet.
That's what you're saying. Okay.
That's what we did. I have that. We have that. I have that recorded.
How long was the hole open for?
A couple hours. There was no water in that thing.
No.
It took them forever to get down that deep,
Okay.
and it took them forever to get out. And you have a picture of it. That was a hell of a hole. It's the size of a house. So if there was water here, I think we would have at least seen some indications of it. And the only place where we found water, I think, was in this hole over here.
At what depth?
18 feet.
What elevation would that be then? 420, 360?
The existing grade is about 200, so, 200 minus 18.
Okay.
It was pretty damn deep.
So we're one, yeah, we're 180.
We dug the holes, we dug a hole in every system, and we tried to get at least 4 feet below the bottom of the system. And that's why I said this one here, I think, was like 38 feet
Okay,
deep.
no, okay.
And it was hard down there, don't get me wrong, it was compact material. But even compact material will have a slow infiltration. But there was no water, that hole was open for a couple hours, and there was no water in any hole except for this one. We found groundwater nowhere on this site. And the holes were open for quite a, if you're gonna find groundwater, you open a hole for an hour, you're gonna find groundwater if it's there. You're gonna see some indication, you're gonna see heavy modeling, something. Modeling is an indication of iron, which is an indication of water moving through the ground. We didn't find any of that. And like I said, the only place we found groundwater was down deep in here. And that's part of the record, that's part of the it's on the drawings, the location and the results of those test pits. And we also submitted, pictures of what those holes look like.
Okay. Brian, were there other items that you wanted to discuss?
There was just a couple other items. I'll probably have a couple of housekeeping items and plans, but that leads me to the one thing that it seems like the applicant wants to make a lot of the revisions a condition of approval. And I'm not in favor of that. I would rather have a set of plans that everybody's good with, including me, to be finalized for you
Yeah.
guys to make a decision on.
Is there a reason we
So
can't
I
do
don't
that
see-
procedurally?
I doubt it.
I mean, that makes, so that's fine. We can do it. We don't,
Like this board technically, they need to be sized, they need to be designed.
Our
outlined, something.
obviously, we don't have the plans with us tonight, so for purposes of this commission, that's problematic, but our intention was to have this discussion, bring it before you, get Brian's feedback, and then in the time between now and the Inland Wetlands Commission meeting, which is on the 27th, submit a full set of plans that adopts all of the things that we have agreed to. That was, it's all technical information, so it doesn't make sense to me, maybe some of you, but it certainly makes sense to Mr. Nesteriak. So that was sort of our thought.
because we can't close this hearing tonight, as you know, because wetlands is still going.
You can close the hearing, you just can't decide the hearing. In fact, I think from a time perspective, you're supposed to close it.
Do we have to close it?
Unless they would be willing to use it.
So without an are you,
Well, you don't have to decide that right
let's
now.
put,
Why don't
yeah,
we
right,
finish?
we'll put that
Yeah,
side
finish
by side.
this.
All right, so in that case, all right, were there any other issues that you had?
Only one other issue that came up at the last meeting, the traffic engineer had said something to the tune that they're proposing, I think, a full stop at the Smith and Spring Street intersection. And I think that needs to be memorialized in a plan of some sort. If there are improvements that are going to be made to that intersection, I'll add that I think it's a awkward intersection right now, and it's going to be more awkward after this is put in. So I think it could use a little help if they are going to look at it. But at a minimum, if the traffic engineer is making recommendations, that needs to be also included. That was all I had.
Okay, because at some point, and it's not tonight, obviously, but at some point, we're gonna wanna know what in your mind are the risks associated with it, whatever the differences you have at the end of this thing are. I'll probably be asking the question, what exactly in your mind are the consequences vis-à-vis health and safety of doing it their way versus your way? And that won't be tonight, because there's obviously more going on. Does that make sense? So I think we'll need to have that short, an answer to that question next time. Any commissioners have any other questions then on this?
The only other
Who would
thing
like to go?
I'll say, based on one thing that Mr. Nesteriak said, is that we did agree, and we've suggested a condition of approval requiring us to submit a drainage maintenance agreement, which is something that goes on the land records, and any future owner would be required to comply with as well. I don't think that that's necessarily a standard condition. I don't know that that's what our neighbors have done to, you know, either side of us in the past, but it's certainly something that we're willing to do. And any sort, I believe that Mr. Nastiriak would agree with this, any of this infrastructure, whether it's an infiltration basin or an underground detention system or a rain garden or whatever it is, it all has to be maintained. So, you know, that part we know. It always has to be maintained. And then before we go to the public, may I just, okay. I did want to note that at the Inland Wetlands Commission meeting, Mr. Birdsell and Mr. Brennan were present, and Mr. Brennan wanted to speak and was advised by council not to speak. So to the extent that you have any additional questions that we can address tonight, I just want to make sure that you have the opportunity to ask us, because I know you didn't get that opportunity at Inland Wetlands.
Did you want to address any of the comments at the end of last meeting? If not, we can move on to whatever is next on your agenda.
I'm hoping that I did, but if
Okay.
you find that I didn't, then I certainly do
No,
want to.
I wasn't really keeping track. I'm
Okay.
leaving that up to you. Okay. All right, so what's next then for the applicant?
I think that's really it. I mean, we have this list, which I'm going to ask Jay to hand out. It's the list of 39 different adjustments that have been requested of us throughout this process and how we've responded. And I think that it's important because, you know, we've really tried to be responsive and work with the commissions and the staff, and you'll find that out of the 39 things on this list, we've responded positively, I believe, 34 times. So I hope that you all agree that we've tried to be responsive, and to the extent that the Inland Wetlands Commission requires or requests the infiltration basins, then that'll be number 40, and we are willing to do that, although as Mr. Garcia has noted, he does not think that that is necessarily the prudent practice. So I think that's it for now, unless,
I know the traffic study is a traffic study. I mean, it is what it is, and there's going to be other developments going on in this area that's going to add to it, so you really can't stop that. My concern is the construction end of it, because the applicant said he was going to do this project within a year, and there's 130,000 yards of material to move out of there, which would be approximately 6,000 truckloads going out of there. So that's going to be a really heavy amount of traffic going out of there, and how is that going to affect the roads?
sure.
And because there's only one way to get out of there, because the trucks can never be able to make that hairpin turn getting out of there. So that was just one of my concerns.
Maybe now would be a good time. We've also we've had a lot of conversation over. I think we've been before you 5 different times at this point, and we've suggested a lot of different conditions, as Mr. Nastiriak has noted. So we did put together some draft conditions for your consideration, which I will ask Jay to hand out. And one of those conditions is a required construction logistics plan, which will need to be worked through with your city staff to ensure just that the truck traffic is appropriately routed, and that any sort of disruption or repairs that are required to the road are put in place.
Time frame, because.
And you mean the hours when they're coming and
I
going?
mean, if you're reducing the hours, that it's going to prolong the time frame within a year to be able to get all that material out of there and get the buildings built and paid and 100% done within that time period. I mean, I know he has 5 years to finish the project.
Right.
So
I mean, I think every developer has the best of intentions when it
Yeah,
comes to
absolutely.
starting and
You're gonna run into
finishing a
that stuff.
project, but I just finished a renovation of my house, and I can promise you my contractor, who was my husband,
Yeah.
did not finish on time. So it happens.
But if it was septic gravel, baked gravel, it would disappear tomorrow.
Right.
Okay? But it's not.
Right.
Okay, so I'm sure maybe he has a good location for it to go to, but getting rid of that much material, that's what I see as a problem. Okay. All right, but thank you.
Is there any to that extent? Is there anything that we can do to help alleviate that concern, or?
No, just what you did here is fine.
Okay.
Just what you're working on is fine. You did. Thank you.
I'd just like to make a suggestion. I couldn't make it at the initial meeting because I wasn't seated. But that's another, number 36, provide sidewalks along Spring Street. thought of that day a possible alternative,
Mhm.
and is maybe you guys could put a walkway along your property that both your resident and the Spring Street resident could use.
It's definitely something I'll have to talk to my client about, but from a liability perspective, that's a heavy lift. Inviting, anyone and everyone, right? It would be a public access easement, and so that's a big one.
Well, that's most of the town members had a concern about sidewalks.
Right, but again, that would end up being a sidewalk to kind of nowhere. It would just kind of be a pleasant walk through the campus, but then when they came out the other side, there wouldn't be a safe place to continue that walk.
They were saying like they needed a place to walk their dogs and there were concerns.
I understand.
But
Yeah.
you're a lawyer, that's what.
Well, that's, going to the walking the dog stuff, the little piece of property across the street, can you do something with that for like a dog park or something like that? Because it's good.
This area?
Correct. Yeah.
I think we get into a lot of regulated area space, which then implicates the Inland Wetlands Commission. None of that has been put before them at this point, so I can't say that we can.
So that's gonna be open space.
It's just going to be what it is today. Exactly. We've agreed. Originally, the 2015 Inland Wetlands approval, that was infrastructure. The drainage actually went across the site and dumped directly into the brook. And outlet at the top of the slope, and that was one of Mr. Nasiriak's largest concerns in the initial reviewing phase. So we've removed that infrastructure, and nothing is proposed across that way.
Thank you.
Just add, two things. One, that parcel across the street is not able to be used
For anything. Yeah.
just because the slopes are.
Oh, okay.
But I just wanted to point out that there was a sidewalk in the original set plan. It wasn't necessarily for people outside the complex, but they had taken that away in the first one.
Oh, that walkway connection.
It went from the west driveway to the east driveway, and the meandering after,
Yeah, it was for residents.
For residents, okay.
but it's not on.
Correct.
Does that conclude your presentation?
I think at this point.
Okay, I do have one question, going back a ways. Looking at the architecture of the buildings, and I'm way out of my element here, maybe Tom can help me out, but it seems like they're lacking some design elements that might make them better looking. And I don't know what they are. I mean, maybe it's shutters, maybe it's making sure things are uneven so it doesn't look like a...
My concern was just the
Barracks,
open
but what do you-
carports underneath, there's no garage doors. Right, was there? Yeah.
I think, one of the most important things to recognize is that from the street, you're not gonna be able to see most of this project at all. It's kind of one of the unique aspects of this site. The frontage, we've got the office space here. Other than that, everything is really, really, really set back. But Janet, maybe you can, or should we put up the?
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chairman, I assume you're talking, or
Yeah, my concern was the carports underneath not being closed in, because if you think of somebody's garage, what you keep in your garage, it's gonna tend to clutter it up. And it just,
well, these won't. I mean, they're not personal garages, so you can't really store a lot of, this kind of
so
things
it's
that
just a
we would.
carport underneath for
be a
the designated,
covered
but designated covered parking area, so you're not gonna, not individual units that would float it off. Okay.
Anybody else think of anything from a design perspective that we'd like to see? Again, I'm the wrong person to ask about that, but maybe there's some other people have some other suggestions. Don't be shy.
I'll speak for the residents and engineer, the engineering side. I would agree with you. I think that perhaps the windows, or the spacious, or there could just be some improvements made to doll it up. And I'm not an architect, so I don't want to beat that aside, but I would agree with you. I think that maybe just a little bit more can be treatment to a little bit more attractive. But I do, I disagree that you're not going to see this from the road.
I do too.
This lot's going to get clear cut.
Yeah.
And these are tall buildings,
Yeah.
and they're up on a hill, so I think you're gonna see it very clearly.
And I agree too, and the planting is not gonna cover the trees and not gonna be blinded.
Would you consider getting a little more creative thought and just to
I don't want to offend
see
our
what you
architect.
can come up with, maybe?
Mr. Chairman, I have to say that, you know, the aesthetics of the building is not a health or safety issue. And, you know, we've put thought into the architectural design of the buildings and believe that they are going to be quite attractive. So it's really a subjective thing. You know, what you think is attractive and what I think is attractive may be quite different. But that's the best way that I can
Okay.
respond at this point.
Fine.
And I think,
Yes.
just a note, when you look at a conceptual rendering like that, you know, I guess the question we ask, is it gonna follow the color scheme that may be being presented now, or is it non-repetitive, so it makes it looks a lot more attractive against the depth of the gables and the straight heat lines going on? So is that, you know, I think what, you know, you might be looking at is it really gonna look like that, or is it gonna come out looking something different? And sometimes you see a picture like that, it looks gorgeous, will it really look like that? Coloring wise, architectural scheme, and everything like that. I think that's the question you're asking, too. You know, a review could be made and say, okay, here's what it's really gonna look like. Doesn't give the developer to show a picture like that and then the building's all white.
Well, that's a good question. Are they all gonna be this color?
I'm sorry.
Are they all gonna be this gray tone, or is there gonna be different colors?
I mean, this picture looks a lot different than your picture, because this is just on a copy. So I think what the question is it really gonna look like that, or is it, this is the concept drawing, then it may be all white, or maybe an all brown building, every brown, you know what I mean? So, if that's the question, I'm sure they could narrow that down, so no, this is really what it's gonna look like.
That's the
I don't think we saw
intention.
this picture last time, did we?
We've had it up.
Yeah.
You did?
Every
Okay.
meeting.
Well, I wasn't paying attention. But
You
I
got
mean,
too
I-
caught up in the
yeah,
drainage.
I agree with him, because even like the gazebo right there, looking at it, it looks like it's a metal roof, and that looks really appealing. I mean, it does look good with the trim around it. And I agree with him, is that gonna be the detailed picture of it?
That will be the hope, yes.
Well, that's the hope, either it is or it isn't, not the hope, because, you know, we don't have a lot of.
That is what we're proposing, yes, the color scheme and the look of the building.
Okay, that's okay.
And looking at my client, but
Just identify yourself for the record.
Jerry Kylie, those daggers coming out of my attorney's office, there's a reason. I just want to answer three things. Yes, you're going to see the building front, but you're not going to see the carports. The odds of seeing the carports is slim to none. That was the answer to the question that he asked. Number two, exactly how this gets approved is exactly how it's going to get done. So what you see here, what you see, like WYSIWYG, what you see is what you're going to get, okay? And the last thing I would say is thank you for saying what you said about the picture. You may not think we have pride because of a lot of the comments here, but we do have pride in what we do. And a lot of thought went into this, and we believe this far surpasses buildings of old, Balance Rock, April Gardens, far surpasses Great Oak, which is right next door to us and recently approved behind us. It far exceeds the quality of the architecture currently behind us to the left, which is, I don't know if it's assisted living or the senior housing that's in front of us. So this does, in our mind, exceed all of that. Thank you.
the thing that I'll note that Jay just reminded me of is that the first condition on our draft conditions reads, all work shall substantially conform to the approved building and site plans unless otherwise approved by the Planning and Zoning Commissioner for minor modifications by staff. So this is part of our building and site plans, and so your staff can hold us accountable during the building permit phase.
Okay. I had one other question I wanted to direct at staff. Where do we stand in terms of the issues we have with the fire marshal? Where, because that's obviously a health and safety issue, and
The fire business, I talked to Rocky today, he was made this issue. He's given you the letter, and then further along in your deliberation of your text, there may be some, staff comments on that.
that's the letter, was that the letter we had last
Yeah, the last
month?
time,
Okay.
you heard testimony from both the applicant and the fire marshal. The fire marshal was left with, he was gonna talk to the manufacturer of the apparatus we have here and find out the manufacturer's recommendation or tolerance of the ladder truck, tower truck. The road grades were being talked about between 10%, 12% are about here on multi-family regulations. Now, he had suggested a 10% grade. He investigated further, and the manufacturer came back and said, we don't stand behind anything over 5%. So most of our roads, most of our town roads and conditions in town exceed 5%, exceed 12%, some exceed 14%. So he wasn't able to get any luck from the manufacturer. So
Okay.
basically, the fire marshal under the code here, and I believe the applicant has an expert with that, state that the authority lies with the authority having jurisdiction of the fire marshal's office. So there might be a little discussion of where those roads might exceed 10%. I think his was concern was any place in front of a building where they would have to set that unit up for any kind of rescue or anything made here. We'd like that to be within 10%. Anyone wasn't so much worried about the grade of the road, so to speak, more of where the truck would have actually be set up. So that's where we got with that.
Okay. All right.
It was my recollection, Mr. Chairman, at the last meeting when the fire marshal was here that, he said that he wasn't terribly concerned about it because he knew that we could work together during the building permit process. My concern is that we're not held from a regulatory perspective to a standard that is different from anyone else in this town. So we have agreed to a standard, which is the same standard that is in your multifamily regulation right now. And so to the extent that at certain junctures within the development, the fire marshal says, you know what, we really need 10% at this spot during the building permit review, then that's certainly something that we're going to have to comply with. But from a regulatory perspective, we think that it's important for us to be held to the same standard as, certainly no more restrictive than anybody else.
Right. Well, what was really bothering me was, the 5%, because that's just,
Basically,
That's just a liability.
I think that's just
That's their lawyers talking.
That's absolutely.
okay. All right. Anything further? Because, and do commissioners have any questions? Because I do want to open it up again to the public for them to comment. Staff, do you have anything you wish to add? Good. All right, in that case, I would like to open up the comments from the public. And as before, I'll ask you a couple of things. First, when you come up, please identify yourself for the record, your address. Speak into the microphone so you make sure it gets into the record. Keep your comments relevant to what it is we're talking about here, namely the site plan for this affordable housing project. Try not to be repetitive. Rather than repeat everything you just heard, if you could just say, I agree with the person before. I don't want to limit anybody's time to speak. I do want to hear from everybody. It's important. And with that, I'll open it up first. Does anybody wish to speak in favor of the project? Does anybody wish to speak in opposition to the project?
Hi, Cindy Zukis, 270 Pearl Street in Seymour. Yes, I am against the project of the size of the project, as is most of the neighbors are. The water issues, yes, the filtration probably will work excellent. We'll have clean water going into Housatonic River. Wonderful. But my thing is, once again, like you brought up the depth, yes, where they dug those holes were still way above what the sight line of Spring Street is. Spring Street is still below 30, 40 feet from possibly where they've been digging. The water that is collected in that area is so far down that is equal to Spring Street where it runs into. So now you're going to have your filtration systems and all this overflow water from the roofs and the sewers and going into this clean area. Well, that water is going to still leak below the 20-something feet into where the springs are, and it is going to flood into Spring Street and those houses. So that I can't understand where I could see that he should go even as deep as equal to Spring Street. Find out where that water's coming from, because if that water's going to be sitting on these snow piles, and for the dump area, especially now the whole project, because they can't dump in the clean area in the back of the project that they were produced at one time. It's now going to be dumped all in this one area behind Mrs. Thompson's house and a couple other houses at the end of there. And that's where a lot of leakage is. And like 4 or 5 houses get that spring water flooding. So now you're going to have all this extra snow. And like he said, when you plow, you're going to get the sand and you're going to get that sludge and gunk and papers and garbage that are going to be filtrating in there. My thing is like say, okay, we're going to keep and maintain it. I wish I could believe that, because this developer had owned this property on 16 Smith Street since 2015 or whatever. If you ever go by that property, he does not maintain that. So if here's this owner who's building this big area, maintains a small area, can't maintain a 2-family house, how's he going to maintain a 90-unit area? Who is going to be in charge of this? As you can see now, he takes the time to maybe mow in his property twice a year only, in the spring and in the fall. The rest of the year, that's high grass. The house is falling apart. Things are broken, and you could see it. So, and the renters that he has in there have no respect for the neighborhood. These are renters. He's going to rent. Like I said in the beginning, we should have had condos or something more where people own it. They have pride in it. They're going to keep it clean. We have a developer here who does not keep his own property clean. So how can I believe that he's going to keep this area clean? They did have sidewalks for the people, the renters in the area. Like I just heard today, I guess you eliminated that area. So now where are they going to come? They're going to walk on Spring Street? Now we got to worry about them getting hurt from the traffic now going fast on Spring Street to get to home, because they have no place. You know, they have all these nice underground areas. Yes, it's wonderful, because that's eliminating open land. That's eliminating areas to walk on. That's eliminating areas to look about, because they want to put the buildings there. They're putting the buildings there to make the money, and it's a money proposition. I don't fault anybody for that. You know, it's okay to have this, but use it in perspective to the area. This is not Shelton. This is not Stratford. This is not Cromwell. I see these develops there, and I understand they're nice. They're not that bad, and they are professional to a point, but they also are over 10 acres of land, too. This is still a small area with a lot compiled in such a small, with nothing available even for the renters to enjoy. They won't have the room to walk around. They won't, one swing set for 90 kids. Come on. I mean, you don't even have anything proposed, because now even the park, to get to French Park, there's no sidewalks to get down there to walk. Even on Smith Street, you can't develop a sidewalk there because there's no land. He's not going to put that $1 million sidewalk in for these poor people to walk down the hill. So now you got all this traffic coming up and down Smith Street, and yet now you got families with kids from the renters to walk to the store or to the park. They won't be able to, because now the traffic's going to be there. Now the danger's going to be there. Yes, right now their study shows there's no danger because they're not developed yet. They're not putting that problem there. If you have homeowners, they care. If you have renters, I hate to say it, I was a renter for many years. I rented to many areas, and I know they're far and few of caring about their property. We just had a good example on Spring Street. the owner of the home moved away. What happened? He's had to rent out. What happened? Smoke damage, fire. First time, 65 years old I'm going to be. First time I ever seen this in this neighborhood. Why? Renters. The homeowner's not there. God, I'm getting off the subject, but that's part of it. I think we just need to try to scale it down. And like she says, oh, it was already pre-approved back then. I think what I was reading when it was pre-approved, it was like mostly the inlands and wetlands, and what they approved was the water development and how they're going to do the sewers. I didn't read where it was 11 buildings were pre-approved, maybe the initial set there. So if they could work with us, cut that down, but they don't want to work with us on that because they're not going to cut down, they said. And that's, we want to work with them. Yeah, well, you could build, but work with the neighbors, not what the state laws or town laws are, what they are allowed to do. Yes, like even Mr. Garcia, you did a good presentation about where the water and the filtration and not having the open filtration ponds. Yes, that's better for nature, better for everything, but now it's losing their land because now they have to put the parking lots, they have to put the asphalt, they have to put the buildings. They're not putting anything for people to live properly and happily. It's like, it looks more like a quick in and out for professionals, but you're putting 2 and 3 family bedrooms. These are for families. These are not for professional. Professionals are 1 and 2 bedrooms, and it's a high standard. And I don't see that here, and it's scary. I think I'm more scared of the outcome because they're not saying, well, we'll take responsibility if the town of Seymour's roads get damaged by all our trucks with all this weight. I mean, just to develop that in the beginning is going to be treacherous to our roads. I mean, it's a big expense for the town. I want to see it in writing that they will be responsible and take care of not just Smith Street, but Spring Street and parts of Pearl Street, because these are the roads that are going to be damaged. These trucks have to go on 67. Is the state involved and know that these trucks are going to destroy 67 with all this weight? I could go on. I mean, you guys know the situation. You're up there. I just wish you would dig deeper, find out what we're talking about, how we understand it, and good luck. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to come up and speak?
Helen Knapp, 13 Spring Street. I don't approve of this development either, and I agree with Cindy, the things she said. And I have photos here of, we had the minor fire on January 3rd, what it did to our street. Totally blocked from one end to the other with fire trucks. What will it be like with the development up there with our small street? And when the engineer came, he had the big trailer. I have a picture of this blocking also. What's going to happen when they start developing all these trucks? How are we supposed to get out to doctor appointments or groceries? Our whole street is going to be blocked. We won't even be able to get through to get out onto Pearl Street. This has to be taken into consideration for our street, our narrow, small street. You guys maybe didn't consider this. It's very important. And my house is directly where they're going to supposedly have the right-of-way just to be used for emergencies. And it's going to be on a hill. Right now, our whole street is a drain catch in front of my house and 2 in front from the street, from up above, which comes down. I get water in my basement now, and people get water in their basement. What are they going to do to stop this? You know, I mean, if you want to look at some of my photos, I'll show them to you. But please take this into consideration, all the big trailers to get all the dirt out. How are we going to get out of our driveways? Mostly elderly people or young people, we have to back out. And as far as parking, they're not allowing enough of parking for 2 and 3 family. You're going to have 3 drivers. 270 cars on the street coming, and where are they going to park? They're going to block our street. We'll never even be able to get out of our own homes. And a lot of our people are in our 70s and 80s. It's not fair. Something should be, considered. And I guess that's about it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak from the public?
Good evening. Doug Milone, 3 Spring Street, resident there for 43 years. Spring Street is a small back road. You could almost jump across the street. You have to see it to know what I'm saying, regardless of all these beautiful plans. This is a major disruption in the lives of the people that live in the area, putting in something like this. And it's just something that is going to wreck lives of people that live in that area, not just Spring Street, but the surrounding area. So I'm backing up these 2 ladies that were just up here. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak?
Conrad Dom, 18 Spring Street. My sister lives in the Anna Lopresti building that was, I think, sold for $100,000 to some developer by the town. There's cracks in the wall, faucet's falling out. She had a leak, took 6 months to get fixed in the ceiling. There's no maintenance going on in that building. It's 3 years old. Somebody ought to take a look at that. As far as the water coming up, I'm a genius. I drilled a hole in my sump pump hole. We had rain one time. I got a fountain coming up. When the water table's high, which is not right now, when we have 3 or 4 feet of snow and it all melts in the springtime, you dig a hole then and see how much water you find on Spring Street. My house, my basement is level with the road. If I went down from there 34 feet, I'd probably have enough water to fill up Connecticut. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak? Is there anybody else who'd like to speak not in favor, not against, just in general about the application? All right. Counsel, if you wish, just, you get the last word if you'd like to say anything. It's your call.
Kind of weird when I'm standing in the middle. Just to briefly address the comments. Mrs. Zukas noted that she agreed that the infiltration would work, and that, but she's concerned because Spring Street is far below, I guess, the elevation of our development, and it sounds like she's concerned about flooding. And to that extent, I believe Mrs. Knapp also expressed some of similar concerns. And it's sort of counterintuitive, I know, when you think about a large development, that something like this would go in and that things would get better. But that's the case because there's a lot of infrastructure that goes into place that isn't in existence today. Right now, all of the infrastructure that Mr. Garcia went through in a lot of detail and that Mr. Nasteriak has reviewed, that's not there today. It'll be there after post-construction, which is why Mr. Garcia has said, and I believe Mr. Nasteriak has agreed, that post-development flows will be less than pre-development flows, which means there'll be less water leaving the site after development than leaves the site today. And so I think that's really important for the neighborhood to understand. In terms of maintenance and keeping the property clean, this is not an absentee landlord type of situation. This is a large-scale development that will have a full-time property manager on site. There's a leasing office on site. So, this property will be maintained, and because if we are approved, we'll have a zoning approval. We'll be required to keep it up to speed, and we can be cited if we don't. Not enough parking. I think we've addressed this before, but and there's information in the record to this effect. But there's plenty of parking for this property. It's almost exactly the same as your multifamily parking requirement, and given the ITE requirements. We exceed any type of parking requirement that ITE puts out there, so we're not concerned about parking. In terms of impacts and construction access and disruption and all of those things, I get it. During construction, construction is disruptive, it is. But whether we were developing 63 units or 90 units, it would be disruptive. It's always going to be disruptive. I'm sure the condominiums next door to us, which are owner occupied, I'm sure the construction of those units was disruptive. I'm sure the construction of the senior housing to our other side was disruptive. It just is. And whether we had the 63 units or the 90 units, and I can tell you this because we've had the plan, you all know this, it was 11 buildings back in 2015 with 63 units, and it's 11 buildings in 2020 with 90 units. So from that aspect, it's the same. Mr. Chairman, if you'll indulge me for just a few moments longer, we talked a little bit about what is an affordable housing application and what are the requirements of an affordable housing application, but that was really in the context of the text change and the map change. So for purposes of the record, I'd like to just make a few comments, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So in connection with your review, I think that it's really important to remember the key purpose of the affordable housing statute, and that's to encourage and facilitate the much-needed development of affordable housing throughout the state. Any affordable housing developer will tell you that funding at the state and federal level is basically non-existent at this point. Can't get money out of the state or federal government. We're on a debt diet. We all know that to be the case. So this means that it's now more important than ever for us to support affordable housing developments like this coming from the private sector. The affordable housing statute was originally adopted in 1990, yet the majority of Connecticut municipalities don't meet that 10% threshold requirement by the statute. 31 of the 169 communities meet that 10%. And Seymour is one of the communities that doesn't meet that threshold. Only 5.75% of the housing in Seymour is affordable within the meaning of the statute. Based on the 2016 Plan of Conservation and Development, there's a 2 to 3 year waiting list with the Housing Authority, the Seymour Housing Authority. According to the CIRC 2018 profile for Seymour, almost 47% of renters are cost burdened, which means that they're spending more than 30% of their income on rent. So while, and the majority of Seymour's multifamily housing stock is between 30 and 40 years old, so that goes to some of those maintenance questions. So while those units could be considered de facto affordable, there's nothing that prohibits, in fact, we would encourage people to invest in their properties, and when they do, there's nothing to stop them from raising their rents because there's no deed restriction on those buildings. Your POCD also identifies certain strategies to address the affordable housing needs of this community, maintain the housing diversity to meet the needs of the community, continue to work with the Seymour Housing Authority to meet the needs of the elderly population, and the need for more sustainable affordable housing options. Yet, 71.5% of the housing stock in Seymour is owner-occupied. We heard about the kind of the preference tonight for owner-occupied housing, but not everybody can afford to own their own home. And the affordable housing inventory is not adequate to address the anticipated increase in your elderly population. As a town, Seymour has identified the issue and set goals to address it, but the only way to actually effectuate the change is to allow this type of development to move forward. As a remedial statute, 830G is liberally construed, we've talked about that, in favor of those seeking to build affordable housing. As a reminder, in order to deny an affordable housing related application, the Commission must find that a substantial public interest that you seek to protect clearly outweighs the need for affordable housing, and that public interest cannot be protected by a reasonable change to the proposal. Unlike a conventional zoning application, the burden is on the Commission, not the applicant, in the context of an affordable housing proposal. We believe that we have firmly established the need for affordable housing. here in Seymour, and that we've proposed a thoughtful project on an appropriate site in town. The property is primarily zoned multifamily, and the vast majority of the existing development standards for garden apartments in the multifamily zone have been adopted by this proposal. You've heard from all of our professionals that this project will not result in a health or safety issue for the town. For all of these reasons, we hope that you'll approve this project. The only other thing that I'll add is we talked, I think, in the context of the text change and the zone change about those hue points, which help get you towards a moratorium. To the extent that you need a refresher on that, Jay is happy to walk you through that. If you don't need it, we're happy to also not. It is in the record and part of one of the many compendiums that you've received from us.
That would probably be redundant.
Okay.
Thank you, though.
So then I will look to Jay. Have I missed anything?
Just one quick question.
Sure.
And I understand the affordable housing scenario.
Sure.
Not as well as you, but probably close. And but I don't want to lose track of one kind of interesting irony here. Your average rent is going to be how much in these units?
I don't
For the
have them.
affordable units?
I don't have them in front of me.
$11.50
but
was
let
it?
me- can I reference
Sure.
it? So by statute right now, and these are based on the 2019 numbers, the new numbers I think will be forthcoming. I think they usually are released around April. So for a 2-bedroom, $1,460, and for a 3-bedroom, about $2,000. That's the maximum.
And do you know what the average non-affordable
Oh, and that's at the
designated?
80% level. I'm sorry. There's different for 60%.
Yeah. Do you know what the average rental is for non-affordable housing designated units?
For the market rate units?
Market rate?
It's as much as you can get, that's what market rate is.
But do we know what the number is? The point I'm getting, and I'm not being critical, I'm not making any value judgment, I'm just saying that people are probably going to figure out at some point that while these are called affordable housing units, their rent is at or above the average rental in Seymour. Am I misstating that, or it's very close to it? And again, not a criticism, not a value judgment, but something I think people will figure out and may want to ask us at some point. I just want that on the record. Having said that, I fully understand, and I think the board either understands or will understand, and I think a lot of the people in the public understand what the affordable housing statute does and how it works. Just wanted to make that comment.
Understood.
Okay, so you're all set?
I have one question. As you're saying on the need for the elderly in affordable housing, do any of these units contain handicapped accessible? And is there a percentage on that?
I'll ask Janet to answer that, but yes, we're required to.
I'm Janet Rozeski from Gooding Architecture. By the Connecticut code, we're required to have 10% of the units be type A, which is fully accessible to someone. So those would be the the lower level, because those would be accessible to the handicap. So there'll be 9 units, because we have 90 units. 9 of them would be required to be type A accessibility.
Anything else from the commissioners? In that case, I just want to clarify with council, because we were talking about closing, not closing the hearing.
I would recommend that you leave the hearing open, because if you get the report from the wetlands, you won't be able to discuss it with council if your hearing is closed.
Which is why I'd hope we'd be able to keep the hearing open and get permission for you to go another 30 days.
Mr. Chairman, we're not in the position to grant a further extension at this point. We are comfortable that we have moved the needle as much as we possibly can. I've handed out that that exhibit with the now 40 different offerings that have been put into place. And whatever happens at inland wetlands on the 27th, we're prepared to address that in whatever way we can, but we don't feel that it's appropriate at this time
Okay, all right.
to keep the hearing open.
Then I just want to confirm that we are okay with closing this hearing, notwithstanding the fact that we do not have an inland wetlands approval. We're not violating any rules or statutes by doing that. In other words, we're not prohibited. Are we prohibited from closing this hearing? Right. Well, we're put in a difficult position because we cannot but close the hearing without the permission of the. Okay, so we're. Right, and if we were to not close the hearing tonight, we would have an automatic approval. Is that what would ultimately happen? If we did not close the hearing tonight, we would have an automatic approval? Okay, so we're not risking that. All right, so that's your final position.
To the extent that you'd like, we do have a case demonstrating or confirming rather that you are permitted to close the hearing, notwithstanding the fact that you haven't received the report. If you want, I know you are an attorney.
Well,
So.
we're more
No, I know. I was just saying for curiosity's sake, if the chairman.
That's what I'm concerned about. Right.
I understand. Mr. Chairman, if I can I take just a 5-minute recess just to speak to my client to ensure that we're on the same page on this
Absolutely.
matter?
We'll stand in
Okay.
5-minute recess. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I go talk to her?
Yeah.
Smoke 'em if you got 'em.
I think everybody's got the same idea I had, except I didn't move fast enough. Boys rule.
Like you said, it gets, trying to drag it out. You know, the building is a lot better than I thought it was. I really didn't see that picture before. The other picture is gray, it didn't really give me the shape to it. It doesn't. And, you know, the carports, look at the carports. I mean, Brian, it does need a little bit more out of it.
That's fine.
But sure, I mean, just, you know, shutters, they're putting shutters on it. I mean, if they're all, if you have some decent buildings, and if they're all that same color, that kind of doesn't break it up, you know what I mean? Because if you change the color, it's gonna break it up, you know, let's say you have these three of the same.
No, no, I
Make it a little better,
we have a friend of
just my opinion.
when I first saw you,
Yeah.
But the roof lines are different. I really didn't see that picture last time. They didn't have it up for very long.
Fred, it wasn't. So, well, we joke about that every year now. We want to do a thing. And my wife said, well, why don't you do it? And I said, well, I'm not going to do it. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. That's gonna be a hoot.
No more evidence.
Right.
Okay.
I didn't write it out, but on the regular agenda.
It's you, Mike, who?
Mike and Bill. We can start off with Mike, Bill, Mike, and then that gives us the authority to sign.
Circus you're running here, Joe. I'd be glad when this one's over, we'll go back to half-an-hour meetings, maybe?
Well, this is a little bit, I think it's a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, it is, it does, yeah.
I mean, even though,
I almost look forward to
we
coming.
got such constraints, I mean, our constraints. are
Yeah,
very-
yeah, our hands are tied.
Huh?
Yeah. Yep, yep.
What's that?
Okay, folks, we
Yeah,
can come
that's
back to
gonna- yeah.
order.
Miss Leon.
Everybody can please be seated.
Miss and Leon.
I need a hammer.
Oh, no, you're good.
Can I have everybody's
Come
attention,
to order.
please?
We're getting you a gavel.
Let's come back to order. My own stick.
I know. Hey,
Take your shoe off and start banging on the table
I like it.
what's his
I
name?
say we gotta get him a gavel.
Can we get him a gavel?
Yeah, I think we can.
I got a hammer in the trunk.
Have you ever seen a gavel? A portable gavel? So we could be the first? No, no gavel. I like the gavel. We want to hit, no. You know why? 'Cause
All right,
it's
we're-
dangerous with a gavel.
We're back in our hearing. Counsel?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that accommodation. I appreciate it. Our position remains the same. We really, just to give you kind of the way that we're thinking, as you all know, we have an approval from 2015 with a drainage design that your town engineer certainly did not think was appropriate for the site, but nonetheless, it is a valid approval. I submitted tonight a list of all of the adjustments that we've made. A lot of those adjustments relate to that drainage design. We talked tonight about an additional adjustment that we're planning to present to inland wetlands on the 27th. And to the extent that they think that that's the appropriate way to go, we're prepared to implement that. And we certainly are planning to provide Mr. Nesteriak between now and then with all of the technical information, those drawings, and the drainage report to back that up. We've exhausted the limit of what we can do in terms of adjustments, so no matter what comes out of inland wetlands at this point, we're comfortable closing the hearing.
Okay. In that case, I'll entertain a motion to close public hearing. Council, we're ready to go then, right? All right, would anybody like to make a motion to close the public hearing?
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
And do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
All right?
Aye.
Any opposed? One opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so carried. The hearing is closed. Thank you. All right, now let's go right into our regular meeting. Do we need to seat Leon, right? Can I,
I'll make a motion to see.
Leon Sloat,
Leon Sloat.
as a full member, any second?
I'll second that.
Second, and all in favor?
Aye.
All right?
Any opposed? So carried. We're on here, right? Everything's working? Good, okay.